stood in the back of the grand ballroom, champagne flute in hand, watching my sister's wedding fall apart in real time. The crystal chandeliers above cast dancing shadows across faces frozen in shock and horror. Mother's carefully applied makeup ran in black rivulets down her cheeks. Father's face had gone an alarming shade of purple, and Jessica, golden, perfect, beautiful Jessica, stood at the altar in her $70,000 gown, screaming at her groom as he walked away. I took a sip of champagne. It was excellent. I'd made sure of that when I'd anonymously sponsored the bar. "You can't just leave!" Jessica shrieked, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "We had a deal, you promised!" Marcus Chen, tech entrepreneur and one of the most eligible bachelors in the city, didn't even turn around. His groomsmen followed him like a well-dressed flock of birds, their footsteps crisp and final on the marble floor. The massive oak doors closed behind them with a definitive thud that seemed to echo through eternity. 300 guests sat in stunned silence, 300 witnesses to the Whitmore family's spectacular implosion. I noticed several phones out recording. Good. The video would be trending within the hour. My mother's gaze swept the crowd desperately before landing on me. For a moment, just a moment, I saw the same dismissive contempt she'd shown me for 23 years of my first life. Then recognition flickered. Recognition of the Valentino gown I wore, the Harry Winston diamonds at my throat, the quiet confidence that money and success had woven into my very posture. Her expression shifted to something like hope. I raised my glass to her in a silent toast and smiled. Then I walked out. The fresh air outside the hotel felt like freedom itself. My driver pulled up immediately in the Rolls-Royce Phantom, and I settled into the leather seats with a satisfaction so deep, it bordered on spiritual. Behind me, I could hear the chaos beginning, raised voices crying, the distinctive sound of a family destroying itself from the inside out. I'd been reborn 3 years ago at age 20 on the morning of my death. Or rather, on the morning that should have been my death. I'd woken up in my childhood bedroom in a body 3 years younger than the one that had died in a psychiatric ward at age 23, abandoned and alone, with nothing but a failing liver and a note from my family saying they couldn't afford to visit anymore. In my first life, I'd spent those 3 years trying desperately to earn my family's love. I'd worked 3 jobs to pay for Jessica's wedding dress. I'd emptied my student loan money to bail father out when his restaurant failed. I'd donated part of my liver to mother when she got sick from decades of wine and prescription pills, even though the doctor said my own health was too fragile for the surgery. They'd taken everything. And when there was nothing left to take, they'd left me to die, alone. But this time, I'd done something different. This time, I'd just let them go. The first test came 3 days after my rebirth. I was standing in my cramped studio apartment, the one I'd rented with my own money from my part-time job at a bookstore because my parents had given the larger bedroom in their house to Jessica's collection of designer clothes. My phone rang, mother's number. In my first life, I'd answered immediately. She'd been calling to say Jessica needed help with a term paper. I'd stayed up all night writing it, then gone straight to my shift at the bookstore where I'd passed out from exhaustion and gotten fired. This time, I let it ring. Then I blocked her number. The freedom was intoxicating. I stood there for a long moment staring at the phone, waiting for the crushing guilt that should have come. The voice in my head that had always whispered, "They're family, they need you, you're being selfish." But I'd died once already. I'd felt my consciousness fading in that hospital bed, reading their last message. "Sorry, too expensive to visit. Get well soon." With a heart emoji. The guilt didn't come. Instead, I made a list. I pulled out my laptop, an ancient thing held together with duct tape and prayer, and opened a document. I titled it, "Things I Remember." Then I started typing. Stock market crashes, cryptocurrency surges, tech companies that would explode in value, real estate developments that would transform neighborhoods, patents that would be filed, business deals that would succeed or fail. I remembered 3 years of newspapers, business journals, and Reddit threads I'd obsessively read while lying in that hospital bed, trying to distract myself from dying. I remembered Jessica's affair with Marcus Chen, which had started 6 months before their wedding. I remembered how she'd bragged about tricking him into proposing by claiming she was pregnant, then miscarrying. I remembered the prenup he'd signed in a haze of grief and manipulation. I remembered Father's second restaurant, the one he'd opened with my liver donation money. The one that would fail even harder than the first, dragging the entire family into bankruptcy. I remembered everything, and I was going to use it. The second test came a week later. Jessica showed up at my apartment at 2 a.m., mascara streaming, having been dumped by her boyfriend of the month. In my first life, I'd spent the entire night comforting her, lost my bookstore job for missing my opening shift, and she'd never even said thank you. I pretended I wasn't home. She banged on the door for 20 minutes before giving up. I sat in the dark, eating ice cream straight from the container, and didn't feel a thing. The third test was harder. Father called from the hospital. Mother had collapsed. Something with her liver, the same thing that would kill her in 2 years in my original timeline, prompting my donation. He needed money for tests. He needed me. I don't have any money, I said calmly. I'm a college student working at a bookstore. But Jessica said Jessica is mistaken. I can barely afford my rent. A long pause, then, you were always selfish, just like your grandmother. He hung up. I sat there, phone in hand, and felt the first real tears since my rebirth. Not because of his words, but because I'd finally heard them for what they were. The manipulation of a weak man who'd spent my entire life making me responsible for his failures. My grandmother. He'd thrown that in my face like an insult. My grandmother, who had died when I was 15, who'd been the only person in my family who'd ever really loved me, who'd left me a trust fund that was supposed to be mine when I turned 21. The trust fund my parents had somehow convinced me to sign over to pay for Jessica's college tuition. Family helps family, they'd said. Grammy would have wanted Jessica to have opportunities. Jessica had dropped out after one semester to become an Instagram influencer. I pulled up my bank account on my laptop. The balance was pathetic, $847. My next paycheck from the bookstore wasn't for another week. My rent was due in 3 days, but in 6 months, Bitcoin was going to surge. In 8 months, a little tech startup called Novus Systems was going to go public, and their stock would increase 4,000% in 2 years. In 1 year, the waterfront property on Beacon Street was going to be rezoned, increasing in value overnight. I just needed seed money. I spent the next 4 hours researching every high-interest loan, every credit card, every possible source of capital I could access. Then I did something crazy. I called my grandmother's lawyer. Mr. Peterson had handled Grammy's estate. He was 76 now, probably close to retirement. In my first life, I'd never contacted him after my parents convinced me to sign over the trust. I'd been too ashamed, too guilty, but I wasn't that person anymore. Miss Whitmore, he said when I finally got through to him. His voice was warm, kind. I was hoping you'd call. You were? Your grandmother made certain provisions in her will. Safeguards. She was concerned about your parents' financial situation. My heart started pounding. What kind of safeguards? The trust fund that was to be yours at 21. Did your parents ever tell you about the contingency clause? The what? There was a long sigh on the other end of the line. Of course they didn't. Miss Whitmore, if at any point before you turn 21 you believe your inheritance is at risk from family pressure, you can invoke the emergency clause. The funds will be released to you immediately with certain restrictions on how they can be spent, primarily education, housing, and business investment. Your parents can't touch them. I nearly dropped the phone. How much are we talking about? Including growth over the past 5 years, approximately $470,000. The apartment seemed to tilt. In my first life, I'd given this away for Jessica's tuition, and she'd used maybe $30,000 of it before dropping out. The rest had gone to my parents' failed business ventures. I want to invoke the clause, I said immediately. Right now, today. I'll prepare the paperwork. Can you come to my office tomorrow morning? I would have crawled there on broken glass. Yes. Absolutely yes. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, doing math in my head. 470,000. I could invest it, diversify, use my knowledge of the next 3 years to turn it into millions. I could be free. When my phone rang at 6 a.m., I knew it was Mother before I even looked. Somehow, impossibly, she knew. Maybe Mr. Peterson had a legal obligation to inform them. Maybe it was that mystical parental sense that only activated when money was involved. I answered this time. How dare you? she hissed without preamble. That money is family money. Grammy left it for all of us. Grammy left it specifically for me. There's a letter. Mr. Peterson read it to me. That wasn't true yet, but I knew it would be. Grammy had loved me. She'd seen what they were doing to me. You selfish little bitch. Your father is in the hospital with me right now. I could die, and you're stealing from your own family? Something hard and cold settled in my chest. You're not dying. You have fatty liver disease from decades of alcohol abuse. The doctors told you to stop drinking and you'll be fine, but you won't stop, will you? Because that would require actually taking responsibility for something. The silence on the other end was absolute. Jessica needs that money, Mother said finally, her voice shaking. She's been accepted to... Jessica got kicked out of community college for plagiarism. I know because I wrote the paper she plagiarized. She's not going back to school. She's going to date a series of rich men and live off their money until she convinces one to marry her. You're jealous. You've always been jealous of your sister. No, I said quietly. I'm not. Not anymore. I'm done. I hung up. My hands were shaking. My heart was racing. But underneath the adrenaline was something else, something light and bright and fierce. Liberation. The next 3 years unfolded like a dream I was directing. I invested Grammy's money strategically. Bitcoin first. I bought in at $8,000 and sold at $64,000. Then Novus Systems stock the day they went public. Then the waterfront property, purchased through an LLC so my family couldn't trace it to me. I day traded carefully, used my memories to avoid the crashes and ride the surges. By the end of year 1, I had $3 million. I quit my job at the bookstore. I finished college with a 4.0 GPA and no distractions, because I'd blocked my entire family on every platform. I graduated with a degree in business and immediately started my own venture capital firm, using my knowledge of future markets to make seemingly impossible predictions that all came true. My reputation grew. People started calling me prophetic, lucky, brilliant. I was none of those things. I was just a woman with a unique advantage and nothing left to lose. Meanwhile, I watched my family from a distance. Jessica dated Marcus Chen for exactly the timeline I remembered. She got pregnant, or claimed to be. He proposed, she miscarried. They set a wedding date. He signed the prenup. Father opened his second restaurant with money borrowed from loan sharks. Mother's drinking got worse. They kept calling me, new numbers every time I blocked them, begging for help, for money, for me to stop being selfish and come home. I never answered. Then 2 months before Jessica's wedding, I made my move. I'd been tracking Marcus Chen's business for a year. He was smart, driven, and I remembered from my first life, devastatingly heartbroken when he eventually discovered Jessica's affair and lies. In my original timeline, he'd found out 2 years after the wedding, and the divorce had been brutal and public. This time, I decided to accelerate the timeline. I created an anonymous email account and sent him a simple message. Your fiancée is not who you think she is. Check her phone records for calls to a burner number. Check her calendar for hair appointments that happen at the Riverside Hotel, room 347, today at 2 p.m. I didn't sign it. I didn't need to. Marcus Chen was a tech genius. He'd built his fortune on data analysis and pattern recognition. Give him a thread, and he'd unravel the whole tapestry. He found her with her personal trainer in exactly the room I'd specified. I know because I'd hired a private investigator to document it. Not for Marcus, he didn't need my help with that, but for myself. Insurance. The photos were spectacular. Marcus called off the wedding 3 days later. But Jessica, manipulative to the end, convinced him it was a moment of weakness. She cried, she begged. She claimed the trainer had forced himself on her. Marcus, soft-hearted despite his genius, wanted to believe her. So I sent him the text messages, the ones Jessica had sent her friends, laughing about how easy it was to manipulate tech nerds and how she was going to bleed him dry in the divorce. I'd gotten them from a mutual friend of Jessica's, a girl she'd bullied in high school who was more than happy to help take her down. But Marcus still didn't cancel the wedding. Love makes fools of us all. So I waited. I planned. And I made sure that when Jessica walked down that aisle, everything she'd built would crumble at the exact right moment. The key was the prenup. Jessica had convinced Marcus to sign a prenup that was hilariously one-sided. If the marriage lasted less than a year, she got nothing. If it lasted more than a year, she got 30% of his assets. After 5 years, 50%. She'd planned to make it past the 1-year mark and then discover they were incompatible. I'd done the math. Marcus was worth approximately $340 million. 30% would be $102 million a year. So I made sure Jessica couldn't wait. I started with her credit cards. Anonymous tips to the companies about suspected fraud. Her cards were frozen. Then her bank accounts, just a few well-placed reports about suspicious transactions. Nothing illegal, just enough to tie up her funds in compliance reviews. Suddenly, Jessica was cash poor, and Jessica without money was like a fish without water. She started asking Marcus for things, expensive things, a new car, a vacation home, jewelry. She got sloppy, demanding. The sweet, demure act started cracking. Then I arranged for Marcus to be offered the opportunity of a lifetime, a business deal in Singapore that required him to be out of the country for 3 weeks. During the lead-up to the wedding, Jessica had a meltdown, a very public meltdown at a charity gala where she threw wine in the face of Marcus's business partner and called him a workaholic robot who cares more about money than his future wife. The video went viral. Marcus didn't cancel the wedding, but he did push it back by 2 months, citing the Singapore deal. Jessica, desperate and angry, made her fatal mistake. She went back to the personal trainer. My private investigator got better photos this time. Video, too. And I made sure they were delivered to Marcus's best man, his CFO, his mother, and his sister. All the people who actually cared about him and would make sure he saw the truth. The wedding was still on. Marcus told his family he wanted to confront her at the altar. He wanted her to face the consequences publicly, the way she'd publicly humiliated him. I wasn't invited, obviously. The Whitmore family had written me off years ago, but I called in a favor with the hotel's event coordinator, someone whose startup I'd invested in 2 years prior, and secured myself a spot in the back of the room as a vendor supervisor. Which brought me to today, to this moment, to watching Jessica's world end in real time. The aftermath was glorious. The wedding video trended on 6 different platforms. Jessica's tearful screaming, her insistence that she loved Marcus, that this was all a misunderstanding, that someone was sabotaging her. It was all captured in high definition. The internet was merciless. Within hours, people had dug up her history. The community college plagiarism scandal, the trail of wealthy boyfriends she'd used and discarded. Her Instagram posts where she'd essentially admitted she was a gold digger, thinking it was empowering and funny. She became a meme. But that wasn't even the best part. The best part was my father. He'd taken out a massive loan to pay for Jessica's wedding. $250,000 borrowed from a particularly nasty private lending company. He'd been so sure that once Jessica married Marcus Chen, she'd pay him back, that the Chen family would absorb the cost, that his perfect daughter would take care of him. Instead, he was stuck with the debt. The restaurant, his second attempt at culinary glory, was hemorrhaging money. The loan sharks were circling, and without me to bail him out, without my liver donation to guilt trip me with, without Jessica's rich husband to leech off of, he had nothing. He tried to declare bankruptcy, but you can't discharge private loans that way. The lenders started seizing assets. The restaurant, the car, eventually the house. Mother called me from a burner phone. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "Please," she sobbed. "We're losing everything. Your father's restaurant is closing. We're going to be homeless. You have to help us. You're our daughter." I was sitting in my penthouse apartment, the one I'd purchased in cash 6 months prior. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the entire city spread out before me like a glittering promise. "No," I said softly. "I was your daughter. You made it very clear over 23 years that I was less important than Jessica, less deserving of love or support. You bled me dry and then abandoned me when there was nothing left to take. So, no, I don't have to help you. I don't have to do anything." "But we're family." "Family is supposed to mean something," I said. "It's supposed to mean love and support and sacrifice." You taught me that family means obligation and exploitation. So congratulations. You succeeded. I learned my lesson. You'll regret this, Mother said, her voice shifting from pleading to vicious in an instant. When you're old and alone with no one who loves you, you'll regret treating your family this way. I looked around my beautiful apartment. At the artwork on the walls, the expensive furniture, the life I'd built from nothing. At the calendar on my desk filled with meetings and opportunities and a future that belonged entirely to me. I was already old and alone, I said quietly. I died that way, remember? Oh, wait, you don't remember because you weren't there. You couldn't be bothered to visit. But I remember. And I'd rather die alone and wealthy than die alone and broke, knowing I wasted my life trying to earn love from people who were never going to give it to me. I hung up, then I blocked the burner number and went back to my work. Jessica spiraled spectacularly. Without Marcus's money and with her reputation in tatters, she tried to leverage the one thing she had left, her looks and her social media following. She started an OnlyFans, which would have been fine, except she tried to pretend she was doing it ironically and taking back her power, and the internet saw right through it. Her subscriber count was dismal. She tried to launch a YouTube channel about her redemption journey, but every video's comment section was filled with people mocking her. She tried to get on reality TV, but even they didn't want her. Producers said she came across as inauthentic and unlikable. Eventually, she moved back in with our parents. Except our parents didn't have a home anymore. They were renting a one-bedroom apartment in the worst part of town, all three of them crammed together, fighting constantly. I heard about it through the grapevine, through mutual acquaintances who didn't know I'd cut them off, through social media posts from people who knew the family. It should have made me happy. It should have felt like justice. Instead, it just felt empty. Not because I regretted my choices. I didn't. They'd made their bed and now they were lying in it. Poetic justice for people who'd spent 2 decades making me sleep on the floor while Jessica got the bigger bedroom. But revenge, I was learning, wasn't as satisfying as I'd imagined it would be. It wasn't that I wanted to help them. I didn't. The thought of giving them money made my skin crawl, but watching them suffer didn't bring me the catharsis I'd expected either. It was like I'd spent so much energy imagining this moment, planning for it, working toward it, and now that it was here, I realized I didn't actually care anymore. They weren't important enough to hate. So I stopped watching. I stopped checking in on them through mutual friends. I removed them from my life so completely that they might as well have never existed. And I focused on building something real. My venture capital firm was thriving. I'd made a name for myself as someone with almost supernatural business instincts. Companies sought me out for investment. Entrepreneurs pitched me their ideas. I was invited to speak at conferences, to write articles, to share my secrets to success. I never told them the truth, obviously. Instead, I talked about risk assessment and market analysis and trusting your gut. I talked about the importance of cutting toxic people out of your life. That part, at least, was genuine. I dated carefully. Men who were successful in their own right, who didn't need me to take care of them. Women who were brilliant and driven and had no interest in being saved. I kept things light and casual, never letting anyone too close. Trust, I'd learned, was a luxury I could no longer afford. But there were good moments too, great ones even. I donated anonymously to causes Grammy would have supported. Scholarships for low-income students, programs for abused children, mental health resources. I used my money to make the world a little bit better in ways that had nothing to do with revenge or family. I bought art, I traveled, I ate at expensive restaurants and stayed in luxury hotels. I learned to speak French and Italian, I took up painting, I built a life, and slowly, so slowly, I almost didn't notice it happening. The empty place where my family had been started to fill with other things, real things, meaningful things, friendships with people who actually cared about me, business partnerships built on mutual respect, a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with proving my worth to people who'd never valued me. I was happy, not in the shallow, revenge-fueled way I'd imagined, but in a deeper, quieter way. The way you're happy when you finally stop fighting and just exist. The final confrontation came 2 years after Jessica's ruined wedding. I was at a charity gala. I went to a lot of them now, part of being successful and wealthy and socially connected. This one was for children's literacy, another cause Grammy had loved. I donated a significant amount and was being honored as one of the major benefactors. I didn't see them at first. I was talking to a tech CEO about a potential investment when I felt eyes on me. That prickly sensation of being watched. I turned, and there they were. Mother, father, Jessica. They looked diminished. That was the only word for it. Mother's designer clothes from 2 years ago were worn and dated. Father had aged a decade in 24 months, his face haggard and gray. Jessica's trademark confidence had curdled into something bitter and hard. They'd clearly crashed the event. Security would remove them soon enough, but for now, we were in a crowded ballroom with hundreds of witnesses, and they were walking toward me with the determination of desperate people. Madeline, Mother said, loud enough that people turned to look. We need to talk to you. I excused myself from the CEO and turned to face them fully. No, we don't. Please, Jessica said, and there were actual tears in her eyes. We're family. We made mistakes, but you didn't make mistakes, I said calmly. Mistakes are accidental. What you did was deliberate and systematic. You used me, abused me, and discarded me. That wasn't a mistake. That was a choice. Father stepped forward, his face reddening. Now you listen here. We raised you, fed you, gave you a home. You owe us. I owe you nothing. My voice didn't rise, didn't waver. You gave me the legal minimum required to avoid child protective services. You fed me the cheapest food you could find. You gave me the smallest room in the house. You sent me to public school while Jessica went to private school. You made me work 3 jobs while giving Jessica an allowance. You told me I was selfish every time I wanted something for myself. So, no, Father. I don't owe you a damn thing. People were definitely watching now. I saw phones coming out. This would probably be online within the hour. I didn't care. We're destitute, Mother said, her voice cracking. We're living in poverty because of you. You could help us. You have millions. What would a few 100,000 mean to you? It would mean enabling you to continue the cycle, I said. It would mean teaching you that you can treat people terribly and face no consequences. It would mean I learned nothing from dying alone in a hospital bed, abandoned by the people who were supposed to love me. Jessica's tears stopped. Her face went cold. You're a vindictive bitch. You're punishing us because you're jealous. I'm not punishing you, I said softly. I'm just not saving you. There's a difference. You're suffering the natural consequences of your own choices. The debt Father took out for your wedding, the career you destroyed with your own actions, the reputation you ruined by being exactly who you are. I didn't do any of that. I just stopped enabling you. But we need you, Mother whispered. Please, Madeline. We're your family. I looked at them, really looked at them, and felt nothing but a distant, clinical pity. The kind you might feel for strangers who'd made poor life choices. You were my family, I said. And you taught me that family is supposed to support each other, love each other, sacrifice for each other. But you only taught me what family shouldn't be. You taught me that some people will take and take and take until there's nothing left. And you taught me that it's okay to walk away. Security was approaching now, alerted by the commotion. Don't contact me again, I said, as they were gently but firmly escorted toward the exit. Not through friends, not through lawyers, not through social media. You're not part of my life anymore. You haven't been for years. And I've never been happier. Jessica screamed something at me as she was led away, but I didn't catch the words. Mother was crying. Father was threatening lawsuits. I turned back to the CEO I'd been talking to. He was staring at me with wide eyes. Sorry about that, I said smoothly. Family drama. Where were we? The video did go viral, of course, but this time the internet was on my side. People who'd followed Jessica's wedding disaster recognized her immediately. The story came out not from me, but from enterprising internet sleuths who put the pieces together. The neglected daughter who'd been bled dry by her family. The sister who'd taken everything and given nothing. The parents who'd borrowed money for one daughter's wedding while the other daughter worked herself to death. My rebirth remained my secret, obviously, but the broad strokes were enough. I became a symbol of something. The daughter who said no, the woman who walked away, the survivor who chose herself. Think pieces were written about family obligation versus self-preservation. Podcasts discussed my story. I was invited onto talk shows, which I politely declined. I didn't need the publicity. My firm was successful enough without it. But the most satisfying part came 3 months later. I was having coffee at my favorite cafe when an older woman approached me. She was elegant, well-dressed, probably in her 60s. "You're Madeline Whitmore," she said. I prepared myself for another confrontation. "I am." "I wanted to thank you," she said. "My daughter, she's been in a similar situation, family that takes and takes. She saw your story, saw you standing up for yourself. It gave her the courage to do the same. She's rebuilding her life now away from people who hurt her, because of you." She walked away before I could respond, leaving me sitting there with tears in my eyes. That was worth more than all the money in the world. 5 years after my rebirth, I did something I'd been avoiding. I visited Grammy's grave. I hadn't been back since her funeral in my first life. Couldn't bear it. But now I needed to tell her something. The cemetery was quiet, peaceful. Her headstone was simple but elegant, just like she'd been. I knelt down and placed a bouquet of her favorite flowers, white roses, against the marble. "I'm sorry it took me so long," I said quietly. "I needed to become someone worthy of your sacrifice. Someone who wouldn't waste what you gave me." The wind rustled through the trees. "I know you saw what they were doing to me. I know that's why you set up the trust the way you did, with all those safeguards. You knew they'd try to take it. You were protecting me even after you were gone." A bird called in the distance. "I used it well, Grammy. I turned your 470,000 into 80 million. I started a company. I'm helping people. I'm making a difference. And I'm happy. Really, genuinely happy. Not in spite of what happened, but because I finally learned the lesson you tried to teach me, that I was worth more than they made me feel, that I deserved better." I traced her name on the headstone with my finger. "I just wanted you to know that you saved me twice. Once with the money, and once with the memory of what real love looks like. You were the only one who ever really saw me. And I'm living a life you'd be proud of." I stayed there for an hour, talking to her about my business, my life, the future I was building. Telling her about the scholarships I'd set up in her name, the literacy programs I was funding, the way I was trying to be for other people what she'd been for me. When I finally left, I felt lighter, like I'd been carrying something heavy and finally set it down. 10 years after my rebirth, 7 years after Jessica's ruined wedding, I did something unexpected. I started a foundation, the Whitmore Foundation for Second Chances, I called it. It provided support for people escaping abusive family situations, financial assistance, legal help, therapy, job training, housing support, everything I'd wished I'd had in my first life. The name was deliberate. I wanted them to see it, to know what I'd become, to understand that I'd taken their name, the name they'd wielded like a weapon, and turned it into something that actually helped people. The foundation became my life's work. More than the venture capital firm, more than the investments, more than any of it. This was what mattered. We helped hundreds of people in the first year alone. Young women who'd been financial hostages to their families, men who'd been guilt-tripped into supporting parents who'd abused them, siblings who'd been scapegoated and blamed, people who just needed permission to walk away. I hired therapists who specialized in family trauma, lawyers who understood coercive control, financial advisors who could help people rebuild from nothing, and I made sure that every single person who came through our doors knew one thing. You don't owe your abusers anything. Not love, not money, not forgiveness, not your presence. Nothing. That was the message I wished someone had told me in my first life. The foundation grew. We opened offices in 5 cities, then 10, then 20. We helped thousands of people, and every single one of them was a middle finger to everyone who'd ever told me that family was everything, no matter what they did to you. Family should be everything, but only if they act like family. 15 years after my rebirth, I got married. Her name was Diana, and she was a trauma therapist I'd hired for the foundation. We'd worked together for 3 years before I'd realized I was in love with her. Another year before I'd gotten up the courage to tell her. She'd smiled and said, "I was wondering when you'd figure it out." We had a small wedding. Just close friends, people I'd chosen, people who'd chosen me. No family, or rather, the only family that mattered. The family I'd built. At the reception, someone asked if I ever regretted cutting off my birth family. If I ever wondered what might have happened if I'd tried to reconcile. No, I said simply. I already know what would have happened. They would have taken and taken until there was nothing left again. Some people don't change, and it's not my job to light myself on fire to keep them warm. Diana squeezed my hand under the table. Besides, I continued, I'm happy, I'm successful, I'm loved by people who actually care about me. I'm doing meaningful work, I'm everything they said I'd never be. So, no, I don't regret it. Not for a second. The person who'd asked, a journalist doing a profile on the foundation, looked at me thoughtfully. You know, when I researched this story, I found your family. They're not doing well. I know, I said. Because I did. Not because I checked on them, but because news found its way to me sometimes. Father had died 2 years ago, stress and poor health finally catching up with him. Mother was in a state-run nursing home, her liver finally giving out. Jessica was working as a clerk at a discount store, her social media presence a ghost town, her dreams of luxury and fame long dead. And? The journalist asked carefully. And nothing, I said. Those aren't my problems to solve. They made choices. I made choices. We're all living with the consequences. That's cold. No, Diana said, speaking up for the first time. It's healthy. You don't have to keep drowning to prove you're a good swimmer. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is get out of the water. The journalist wrote that down. The article came out a month later. It was titled, "The Woman Who Let Them Go, How Madeline Whitmore Built an Empire on the Ashes of Family Obligation." It was fair, balanced, and honest. It talked about the foundation, about my success, about the controversy around my complete estrangement from my family. It included interviews with people I'd helped, people who'd been in similar situations. And it included one line from Jessica, tracked down at her retail job. She abandoned us. She chose money over family. I read it and laughed. Even now, she didn't get it. I hadn't chosen money over family. I'd chosen myself over people who'd never treated me like family in the first place. 20 years after my rebirth, I did something I'd promised myself I'd never do. I went back to the hospital where I died in my first life. Not the physical building, that had been demolished and rebuilt, but I made an anonymous donation to their psychiatric ward and their hospice care program. A significant donation. The kind that gets buildings named after you. I didn't want the building named after me, though. I had them name it after Grammy, the Eleanor Whitmore Memorial Wing for Compassionate Care. At the dedication ceremony, I stood in the back and watched as they unveiled the plaque. Watched as doctors and nurses who would never know about my first life promised to care for the forgotten, the abandoned, the dying who had no one. I thought about the version of me who died there. 23 years old, alone, broken. I thought about how she'd wished for a second chance. How she'd thought if she could just do it over, she'd try harder, give more, be better. And I thought about how wrong she'd been. The second chance wasn't for trying harder. It wasn't for giving more or being better or finally earning love that should have been given freely. The second chance was for learning to walk away, for understanding that some battles aren't worth fighting, that some people will take everything and it still won't be enough, that you can love someone and still protect yourself from them, that you can grieve what should have been while building what actually is. The second chance was for me to learn that I was enough, that I'd always been enough, and that anyone who made me feel otherwise didn't deserve a place in my life. I left the ceremony quietly, unnoticed. As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed. Diana, asking if I was okay. "I'm perfect," I texted back. Coming home now. Home, not the cramped studio apartment where I died, not my parents' house where I'd been made to feel small, but the house Diana and I had built together, filled with light and love and chosen family. I got in my car and drove toward it, leaving the hospital and everything it represented behind me. 23 years after my rebirth, the same age I'd been when I died, I stood on a stage in Manhwa, front of 5,000 people. I was giving the keynote address at a conference on family trauma and recovery. Me, the girl who'd once been too afraid to speak up for herself, was now talking to thousands about the importance of boundary setting and self-preservation. People will tell you that family is everything, I said, my voice carrying across the silent auditorium. They'll tell you that blood is thicker than water, that you have to forgive, that you have to give second chances, that walking away makes you the bad guy. I paused, looking out at the sea of faces. People who'd been hurt, people who were still healing, people who needed to hear what I was about to say. I'm here to tell you that's bullshit. Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. Family is supposed to be everything, but only if they act like family. Love is supposed to be unconditional, but abuse isn't love, no matter what they call it, and you don't owe anyone your destruction. I told them my story, not about the rebirth, that would always be my secret, but about the abuse, the exploitation, the abandonment, about the choice I'd made to walk away, about the life I'd built in the aftermath. People ask me if I regret it, I said. If I wish I'd tried harder to make it work, if I feel guilty for having so much while they have so little. I shook my head. I don't, not for a second. Because I tried for 20 years to earn their love, and it was never enough. Because making it work would have meant sacrificing myself on the altar of their expectations. Because their poverty is the consequence of their choices, not my responsibility. I could see people crying and saying in the audience, nodding, understanding. You are not responsible for fixing the people who broke you, I said. You are not required to set yourself on fire to keep anyone warm. You are allowed to walk away. You are allowed to thrive. You are allowed to be happy without their approval. Standing ovation. 5,000 people on their feet, applauding, crying, celebrating. For me, yes, but more importantly for themselves, for the permission they'd just given themselves to do what needed to be done. After the speech, hundreds of people wanted to talk to me, to thank me, to tell me their stories. I stayed for hours, listening, encouraging, reminding them of their worth. One woman, probably in her 60s, gripped my hands and said, I've spent 40 years taking care of my mother, and she's never once said thank you. I thought I was a bad person for wanting to stop. You're not a bad person, I said gently. You're a person who deserves better, and it's never too late to choose yourself. She sobbed and hugged me, and I held her while she cried, while she grieved the years she'd lost, while she gathered the courage to take her life back. This, I thought, was why I'd been given a second chance. Not for revenge, not for wealth, not even for my own happiness, though that was important, but for this, for helping other people find the strength to do what I'd done. To break the chains of family obligation and guilt, to understand that they deserved better. 30 years after my rebirth, I did something I never thought I'd do. I wrote a book. It was called The Art of Letting Go: How I Built a Life by Leaving Toxic Family Behind. It was part memoir, part self-help, part business strategy. I was honest in it, brutally honest, about what had happened to me, about the abuse, the exploitation, the death that had given me a second chance. Okay, I lied about the death part. I said it was a near-death experience, not an actual death and rebirth. But the rest was true. The book became a bestseller immediately. #1 on the New York Times list for 36 weeks straight. It was translated into 47 languages. It sparked conversations around the world about family dynamics, obligation, and the right to walk away. It also inevitably brought my family back into the spotlight. Jessica tried to sell her story to tabloids. My sister's betrayal, the truth about Madeline Whitmore. But no one believed her. Her reputation was too damaged, her credibility too shot. The interviews she gave came across as bitter and delusional. Mother did an interview from her nursing home calling me ungrateful and cruel. The interviewer asked her pointed questions about the years of neglect and favoritism, and she had no good answers. She came across as exactly what she was, a narcissist who couldn't accept responsibility for her actions. I didn't respond to any of it, didn't engage, didn't defend myself. I'd learned a long time ago that the best response to toxic people was silence. Instead, I focused on the positive, on the thousands of letters I received from people who'd read the book and found the courage to change their lives, on the foundation's expanding reach, on my marriage, my friends, my chosen family, on the life I'd built from nothing. 40 years after my rebirth, I attended a funeral. Jessica had died, drug overdose. Though the family tried to keep it quiet, she'd been spiraling for years, unable to cope with the collapse of all her dreams. I hadn't spoken to her in 4 decades. I went to the funeral because I don't know why, actually. Closure, maybe. Or maybe just to see it truly end. There were maybe 20 people there, some distant cousins who barely remembered us, a few former friends of Jessica's who'd stayed in touch out of pity. Mother had died 5 years earlier, her liver finally giving out. The service was brief and impersonal. The pastor clearly didn't know Jessica, spoke in generalities about finding peace and being reunited with loved ones. Afterward, one of the cousins approached me. "It's good that you came," she said. "Family is important." I didn't bother correcting her. At the graveside, I stood apart from the small group, watching as they lowered the casket. I tried to feel something, grief, regret, vindication, anything. But there was nothing, just a vast, quiet emptiness. Jessica had been my sister. Once, a very long time ago, before the abuse and the favoritism and the exploitation, she'd been someone I'd loved, someone I'd looked up to. But that person, if she'd ever really existed, had died long before today. I left before the service ended. Drove back to my house where Diana was waiting with dinner and warmth and questions she knew better than to ask. "How was it?" she said instead. "Sad," I said, and not for her, just sad that it came to that. She nodded. She understood. After 30 years together, she always understood. That night, I dreamed about my first life. About dying alone in that hospital bed. About the fear and regret and desperate hope that maybe, if I could just have another chance, I'd do better. I'd gotten that chance. And I'd done better. Not by trying harder to be what they wanted, but by becoming fully, completely, unapologetically myself. 50 years after my rebirth, I stood in front of a mirror and looked at the 70-year-old woman staring back at me. I'd aged well. Money and happiness had a way of preserving you. But I was old now, no denying it. Gray hair, laugh lines, the soft evidence of a life well lived. Diana stood beside me, silver-haired and beautiful. We'd just celebrated our 35th wedding anniversary. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "About how different this is from my first 70 years, I said. She smiled. She knew the story. The only person in the world who knew the full truth about my rebirth. "Better or worse?" she asked, even though she knew the answer. "Better," I said. "Infinitely better." That night, I wrote a letter. Not to anyone specific, more to the universe, to whoever might need to hear it. "Dear reader," I wrote, "if you're reading this, you're probably in the position I was once in, trapped by family obligation, bleeding yourself dry for people who give nothing back, wondering if you're selfish for wanting more, wondering if you're the problem. You're not the problem. You're the solution. The family you're born into isn't always the family you keep, and that's okay. Better than okay. It's necessary. I'm 70 years old now. I've had 2 lifetimes to think about this, and here's what I know for certain. The people who love you will never make you feel guilty for having boundaries. They will never demand everything while giving nothing. They will never abandon you when you need them most. If your family does these things, they're not family. They're just people who happen to share your DNA, and you owe them nothing. Walk away. Build your own life. Choose your own family. Be happy. They'll call you selfish. Let them. They'll say you'll regret it. You won't. They'll say family is everything. They're wrong. You are everything. Your happiness, your peace, your future, those are everything. Don't make the case. Mistake I made in my first life. Don't wait until you're dying to realize you deserved better. Choose yourself. Choose joy. Choose freedom. And never, ever look back. I put the letter in my book safe along with other personal documents. Someday, after I was gone, someone would find it and maybe understand, or maybe not. It didn't really matter. What mattered was that I'd lived. Really, fully lived. Not for them, not despite them, but completely separate from them in a life of my own making. I'd had my second chance, and I'd used it well. 60 years after my rebirth, I was diagnosed with cancer. Pancreatic, advanced. The doctors gave me 6 months, maybe a year with treatment. I was 80 years old. I'd had a good run. Diana was devastated, but I wasn't. I'd died once before. I knew what was coming, and I'd used my time well. I chose to forego aggressive treatment. Instead, I spent my remaining months doing what I loved. Running the foundation, spending time with Diana and our friends, traveling to places I'd always wanted to see, making peace with the end. One day, about 3 months before I died, I got a letter. It was from a woman who'd read my book 20 years earlier. She'd been in an abusive situation with her parents, who'd been stealing from her and emotionally manipulating her for decades. "Your book saved my life," she wrote. "I read it and finally understood that I wasn't the problem. I walked away that same week. It's been 20 years now, and I've never been happier. I have a career I love, a family I chose, and peace I never thought possible. I just wanted you to know that you mattered, that your story changed lives, that you made a difference." I read the letter 3 times, crying. Then I wrote back. "Thank you," I said, "for having the courage to choose yourself, for building the life you deserved, for being the proof that we can break these cycles. You didn't need saving, you saved yourself. I just held up a mirror so you could see your own strength. Live well, be happy, and never forget that you were always worth it." I died 2 months later, peacefully, in my sleep, with Diana holding my hand. My last thought was this: I'd been given a second chance at life, and I'd used it to teach people the most important lesson I'd ever learned. You don't owe anyone your destruction, and sometimes the greatest act of love you can perform is learning to love yourself enough to walk away. The Whitmore Foundation continued long after my death. Diana ran it for another decade before passing it on to the next generation of leaders. It's still running today, helping thousands of people every year. My book is still in print, still selling, still changing lives. And somewhere in a cemetery next to Grammy's grave, there's a headstone that reads, "Madeline Eleanor Whitmore, beloved wife, friend, and liberator. She taught us that family is what we make it and that we are enough." I'd had 2 lives in this. First, I'd died alone and broken, destroyed by people who should have protected me. In the second, I'd lived fully and joyfully, surrounded by love I'd chosen. If I could have spoken to that 20-year-old girl waking up with a second chance, I would have told her this: don't try to catch up to them. Don't try to win their love. Don't exhaust yourself trying to be enough for people who will never see your worth. Just let them go and build something beautiful in their absence, because you're not behind. You're not less than. You're not lacking. You're just finally, beautifully, completely free. And that made all the difference.
Yeah? Do the dinner now. Nice, let go. Targeted encouragement from governments based on strong trade relations, plus strong soft power moves in the 90s, 2000s. Well, there you go. I guess that makes sense. They are close. It's yeah. Wow. Are you fluent, Fanti? I loved my Japanese teacher in school. Was great. Eggs. Hell yeah. And this song is from Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? I have my PhD. I have my PhD in Japanese fiction and gender norms. That's so sick. Oh my god, that's so cool. That's epic. Wow, I would love to hear more about that. Distance to Sydney to Tokyo is around 7,786 kilometers. So close. Yeah, just around the corner. I remember we learned 小さいうさぎの花の上小さいうさぎの花の上小さいうさぎの花の上だから立っていたはい飛んだ Little Peter Rabbit. Still remember it years and years and years and years and years later. Working towards a PhD in computer science and regret it every day. You're amazing. No, Nana. You're amazing. Yeah. And we did Atana Kata Hisa